Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and back with me is my good friend Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. So today's topic is hill work and ground poles. Um, we're just going to look at those, and especially from the inside out. They're very, very common techniques for building up horses' strength. What else? Increase engagement,
Hmm.
increase leg flexion, building strength and endurance. And I get asked a lot about the use of hill work and ground poles. And you, Deb, I mean, not for people so much. I'm talking horses.
Um, I don't hear it as much probably as you do, but I when I go to facilities, I see ground poles set up. So
Mm,
I know people are using them, cavalettis, whatever you want to call them.
right. So, well, and cavalettis, I think the distinction is a ground pole is literally laying on the ground, where a cavaletti could be anywhere from 3 inches off the ground
Mm,
to 6 inches to even 12 inches off the ground. You can have them different heights. And so that sort of distinguishes a cavaletti from just a ground pole. But what's your understanding of why? Because vets will recommend to clients that with horses that have lameness issues or they're not moving very well, to work with ground poles or do hill work. And that will come
yeah.
as a veterinary recommendation a lot.
Yeah.
And so what's your best understanding of why? Why is that getting recommended? Like for what purpose?
I a couple of things, that wonderful word engagement
I know the
or
nebulous word
the nebulous
engagement.
word or more use of the joints, the actual flexion and extension of joints.
Yeah, I think with ground poles, that's the first thing I hear is a horse that maybe is functionally straight in the hocks or a little
Hmm.
bit sickle hocked, or they've had a joint issue. And going over the ground pole, what we see is all the legs go through a deeper flexion and extension to step over the
Right,
ground pole. And I think it's because we can see the increased articulation through the leg joints, it's like done and done.
right.
And so it was interesting when you worked with a group of people, at one point you actually asked them to march
I do that a
as you
lot.
were working. And so why do you, that would be kind of the human equivalent of putting a horse over ground poles or cavalettis. And so why did you do that?
So it's probably for the exact same reason. Actually, it's more of using a physical exercise to wake up the mental capacity of availability of joints and how we do or do not use them.
Yeah. So kind of bringing an awareness to the joint use, especially
Right,
of the legs. And that's a little bit, it's not a wrong reason to use ground poles.
right.
Ground poles can also get a horse to focus a little bit on where they're putting their feet.
Yeah.
So, and there's a bazillion different ways to set up ground poles and cavalettis, right? So, like, let's just say an easy single ground pole, it'll cause the horse to sort of focus for the moment, feel where their feet are, articulate the joint a little more, and maybe wake up that flexion extension function
Hmm.
of the joint. So, but ground poles, I think, get us and hill work, people start to assume that if the horse is going over the ground pole, they're getting nothing but benefit. And so, where do you introduce marching in your sort of scheme of information or your in your delivery of information, is that one of the first things you do, or is there a reason you do it later in your training of a person?
It depends upon the individual, but and we see this with riders too, is the main reason I introduce it is to bring that pause of thinking back into the equation because we seems like we're always in the to do thinking instead of the being thinking. It's always getting to the door or to the store or whatever, and not actually taking the time to focus on, well, how am I using myself in that practice? So really the exercise is meant to put in a little bit of a pause to the person to actually focus more internally than externally.
Yeah, and I would say the best part of the theory of ground poles or cavalettis has the same end,
Hmm.
right? But I think what I see in practical application is get your horse over the ground pole, done and done,
It's
right?
the doing. It's the doing again.
It's the
And
doing,
then we focus as humans, we get intense and tunnel vision on the pole, which
right?
pulls us down into a downward pull instead of, actually being in the moment of the experience.
Right. So, like, one of the first questions I'll ask a client because they go, are the ground poles helpful or not helpful for my horse?
Right.
And of course, the ubiquitous answer, it depends.
It
It,
depends.
it depends. Like, you can't just answer that question in a vacuum. And
No.
so, what does it depend on? So, the first thing I ask is, how is the horse carrying? What is the head and neck carriage
Mm,
over the ground pole? Right. And that's assuming there's no head setting device on the
good point.
horse, right? So a head setting device is going to force the horse into a frame, but you have no idea how the back and pelvis are actually working going over the
Right.
ground pole. So I like to, if I'm going to use ground poles or cavaletti, I want a loose rein if I'm riding, or I want no head and neck restriction if I'm working on the ground. And that head and neck carriage sort of gives me at least a little bit of an indicator of whether the horse is going over the ground poles, what we call hollow, with the back pushing down,
Mhm.
disengaged pelvis, shortening of the top line muscles, or whether the horse is going over the poles with more hindquarter engagement. Because it's not a guarantee. People think if I get my
Right.
horse over the pole, then engagement is the result. And I go, no, no, they can go over ground poles disengaged all day, every day, over and
Yes.
over and over and over,
Good point.
right? And they can go over the ground poles with the back or top line muscles lengthening or shortening. They can go over
Hmm.
the ground poles with the downward force of the spine or a little upward force of the spine. They can go over the ground poles left-handed or right-handed,
Hmm.
right? So just like us, going faster or dealing with an obstacle doesn't make us any more ambidextrous,
No, not necessarily.
right? And it doesn't necessarily change our use. The hope is that in the process of the challenge, that the horse or a person figures out a better use
Right.
because of the challenge. But that's kind of a hope.
Yeah,
It's not a given
if
side
you don't
effect.
have if you don't have good use when you begin, you're not going to get better use by using a ground pole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Depending, I would say, because
Yeah.
every horse is unique, just like every person.
Or even, are they even going to go over the ground pole?
Right.
Are they
That's
going to refuse to go over the ground pole?
that's the communication part and the mental focus. But if a horse is going over a ground pole with the back pushing down, with the pelvis rotated backwards, with the top line muscles shortening rather than lengthening, then that extra articulation of the joint is actually a negative stress.
Yeah.
rather than a positive stress. And we're so funny because we're just so laser focused on the legs, like
Yeah,
going, oh, the legs are bending more, right? Mission accomplished, done and done. But it's like, what's the axial skeleton doing?
right.
What are the muscles doing? What's the spine doing? What's the overall posture of the horse during the ground pulls,
Yep.
right? Or up and down the hills. I go, same thing. It can be constructive or destructive,
Yeah.
entirely depending. I go, the hill doesn't do the training for you, and the ground pulls
Right.
don't do the training for you. And I think that's why we're so addicted to obstacles and devices
I
and
was just going to say the same thing. We just think we need a new thing. A new exercise is going to take care of it. Where
right,
I s-
a new pattern, a new
Yep,
schooling exercise, a new maneuver, a new obstacle, some kind of new external challenge is sort of like, well, if I repeat it enough, the horse will figure out balance as a result.
it depends.
It depends. I go, not a guarantee,
Nope.
right?
Just same with people. I see people supposedly getting stronger working out in the gym, but still coming to me with pain issues. So that's kind of the same comparison. If you're using your body poorly, even when you're trying to improve it, there's the deconstructiveness of it all.
Oh, hence the rise of orthopedic surgery
Yeah.
for humans. I go because the weight is the weight,
Mm-hmm.
right? It can be destructive to our body if we don't know sort of a correct use while we're lifting weight.
Exactly.
So the weight is a neutral stress, but the stress can be constructive, positive stress, or
Mm-hmm.
destructive, negative stress, totally depending on the inner coordination of the body in conjunction with the stress or in context with the stress.
Yeah. I
So
mean, it's kind of like you need to set yourself up for success before you begin, just like you would for making sure a horse isn't dropping their back before you start an exercise, instead of thinking that the exercise is going to take care of it. Does that make sense?
absolutely, absolutely. And that is a whole, like I talked about on my own in the last podcast, a whole different paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It's like our whole perception of how we go about training is the gadget, the device, the exercise, the maneuver, the pattern, the hill, the ground poles. If we just sort of get her done, then the result is more balance, right?
And we're humans are so stuck on that to-do list. If I do this, I'll get that, when it's not necessarily true.
No, and if I look back just in my lifetime, it's like we do it to ourselves.
Yes.
There were jogging phases, then there were running phases, then there's aerobics phases, then there's the treadmill and stairmaster go to the gym phase and the weightlifting phase and the CrossFit phase. And it's like, but out of those different sort of phases of popular types of exercise, maybe, I don't know, less than 50% or about 50% of people sort of figure it out and get a benefit. But then there's a whole 50% that just destroy their bodies in the process.
And what's interesting is I see a lot of injuries from types of exercises that are supposed to be gentle, like yoga, for instance.
I was blown away meeting a client one time. She had issues with both of her hips, and she was a rider. So we were working with, how to use the hip joint and balance her torso. And she said she was so ambitious in her yoga that you know, more stretch equals better, more limberness
More is
equals
better
better.
theory.
Well, and that's just human nature.
Yeah, it is.
It's if this is good, then more of it is better. And actually had a double hip replacement because she had overstretched and damaged the ligament system supporting
Oof.
her hip joint. And I go,
Oof.
that's pretty hard to do. Those are some
Mhm.
seriously strong ligaments that keep our hips in the socket. And she had torn tendons, ligaments,
Wow.
destabilized both hip joints, and actually had to have replacement surgery. And I go, yoga? Like,
Yoga.
I go, really? That sort of really surprised me. But again, if the goal of yoga is to become more limber, then we can push our body to the point of damage
Yes.
in our ambition to do better. And we do the same to our horses.
Hmm.
And so, what kind of like injuries are you finding with exercises that are supposed to be gentle? Go.
And it's really across the board now because of the way we use ourselves. It's shoulders mainly because have forgotten that we have an elbow and a gliding wrist joint, and where most of our movements are coming directly from our shoulders instead of thinking of all the other joints. Kind of like when I have people march, we have to be reminded that we have all these joints that we can articulate and use, and it doesn't have to be coming from the shoulder all the time. So,
So you'll see like an underuse of the elbow wrist, which
mhm.
puts an overuse or strain on the shoulder.
Yeah, it's that driven thumb. It's overuse of the thumb, with all the devices we have now that directs the arm in that pattern.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
So the overuse of the thumb is would you say, sort of stiffening the mobility of the wrist and the elbow?
well, we tend to, yeah, we just don't use the wrist and elbow anymore because we're using our thumbs so much.
Ah, you don't use
Yeah.
it, you lose it. So let's talk, excuse me, a little bit about hill work. Because hill work, it would be like telling people, go hiking, right? Up and down
Right.
mountains, and you'll get stronger. And it's not untrue. You can't say it's not true to walk up and down hills. Could
Right.
be very beneficial. Again, the hill is a neutral stressor.
It can be.
Yeah, because the incline and decline of a hill is going to add force, add increase forces against the body during motion. That much is true,
Yes.
right? And so what I love about hills is traveling down a hill, the hill itself becomes a pushing force,
Good
right?
point. And they'll break more. So they're getting the braking phase.
Challenged.
Yeah.
And then going up a hill, the hill itself is braking,
Yes.
right? So if we talk about, excuse me, sorry, it's still like major oak pollen. Um, so if we talk about using the back in a horse correctly, increasing engagement, lifting the back, that's directly related to the muscle use that's technically called a pushing muscle use or braking muscle use. So like if we go back to that paper we reviewed on muscle use, what was the technical term? There's a resistance or stabilizing use of the muscle versus a mobilizing use of the muscle. Is that correct? I know you know better than I do on that.
Yeah, that's close.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is it?
I don't know what I don't
Oh,
remember what it's called,
okay.
but
All right. You don't remember either.
no.
But the types of muscle use, like through the back, when we looked at the muscle fiber types, there's a stabilizing use of muscles, and oh, that's what I wanted. That's what it is. Locomotion use of the muscles. So the locomotion use of the muscles is the pushing use. So pushing is locomotion and braking is stabilization,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that has to be in balance. If one exceeds the other, we get dysfunction or compensation or overtax one muscle,
Yes.
underuse another. So that braking pushing balance, the hill work can make it more obvious.
Yeah.
It can bring our attention in our horses going, oh, the pushing element is weak. So if I'm going up a hill where the hill is braking, then increasing the push actually creates that balance
Yes.
because the hill is creating the uphill is creating the braking. And that's why a lot of times teaching horses to canter with some control, cantering up a hill is a really good place to start
I
because
like that idea.
yeah, at the canter, now we're increasing, canter or gallop, we're hitting the horse's higher speeds, which can easily tip them into excessive pushing and starting to push to the point that they're losing control, which is the braking or stabilizing element. So with the hill braking, when we increase speed on a green horse or to actually build up the hindquarter, we would want to push going up the hill, and then going down the hill, we actually need to increase the braking or the
Right.
stabilizing or the slowing element. So that's what I work on hills all the time. I love uneven ground working
Yeah,
horses.
I do too. I really feel that you've got to be very aware of, is the horse dropping their back when you're asking for this task? Are they even capable? Are they do they have a level of organization that
Yes.
that it's beneficial?
No, and if we talk about engagement, my definition of engagement is a rotation of the pelvis around the hip joint that allows the hind legs to be placed closer to the center of the body,
Hmm.
right? So that's what I call engagement. And to place the hind legs closer to the center of the body is part of the braking function, the stabilizing function. That's why more engagement makes the horse more stable. So when the hind hoof comes forward and lands, the braking or stabilizing phase of the leg movement begins. And then the horse is braking until the leg hits peak vertical, and then it begins the pushing phase or the locomotion phase of the leg swing. So with every stride, the hoof comes forward, lands, brakes, transitions at peak vertical, and then pushes, and the leg leaves the ground behind the torso. So if pushing exceeds braking, we get too much backwards rotation of the
Hmm.
pelvis and the horse becomes disengaged,
Right.
right? So that's what can happen when you increase speed on a horse that's not very good at trot or canter. They can easily disengage the pelvic rotation, fall forward, and
Hmm.
then either fall into momentum and just speed up without too
Right.
much control, or they can just refuse to kind of go forward because they go, I keep falling. So increasing using our leg aid to request an increase of pushing force up a hill, the hill is the braking force if the
Right.
horse doesn't have it. But for every hill you go up, you have to come down,
Yes.
right?
Most of the time.
Yeah. At some point, what goes up must come down. And what I found is the bigger challenge, if you're using hill work to really develop a horse, the bigger half of the challenge is the downhill.
Yes.
Because downhill, the hill itself is the pushing element. So that means the horse has to be really good at getting the hind legs underneath,
Yep.
rotating the pelvis forward, braking or stabilizing through the muscles, the pelvis, the back, all of that. And depending on the steepness of the hill, the steeper the hill, the more pushing force it has. So a lot of times people will be thrilled with how the horse goes up the hill, but they're hollow and high-headed and disengaged coming down the hill.
Yeah.
And I go, so how much of a benefit did you get out of that?
Right.
Right? Maybe you're increasing engagement going up, but you're resorting back to dysfunction coming down.
Yeah.
So a lot
It's
of times if the horse has trouble with engagement, it's just like us. If the hill is steep, like riding the trails in Colorado and California, the downhill trails are never, or the steeper the trail, the less straight it is.
correct.
You put in switchbacks,
Yep.
right? That's a lot easier for the body to cope with. So coming down a hill, if we want to increase engagement coming down a hill, we can keep the midline straight and make an S pattern or make switchbacks coming down the hill. Be a lot easier for the horse to engage or find that braking use of the body, stabilizing. And I think people will do the same, like coming down a hill. If you're losing your balance, I go, it's kind of like little kids and adults, right? Little kids running down a steep hill go faster and faster and faster to kind of find their stability. And
Right.
adults kind of lean back and take one careful step at a time.
And that's a really good comparison because if you look, I always make that comparison with people, just like you said, the kid is using all their joints and they're just really playing with momentum and using momentum to make the thing happen. Whereas it seems as we age, we tend to go into that bracing and locking. So, hills, stairs, there's a lot to be said about working around with hills and stairs for older adults.
Mm, yes, yes. The only drawback of momentum, I go, yeah, all the joints are working open and available, but it skates from control to lack of control, having
It
a
can.
wipeout pretty quickly. And I go, little kids bounce,
They
so
do. They
they
just
fall, they get
roll.
back up, keep going. Or after enough tumbles, that's what we learn as we age is I can't afford to tumble anymore.
Yeah, the fear comes up.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So anything else you want to add about hill work or ground poles or even the whole idea that if we do hill work or ground poles with the horse, our horse in a good functional balanced posture, we get a lot of positive stress to the body, builds strength, builds capacity of the body. But the very same exercises could be done in dysfunctional use, poor posture, with way too much. Like now it's going to be a negative stress. You're actually
Right.
going to have,
You're going to have more compaction in the joint.
right, more strain
Yeah.
on the tendons and ligaments,
Hmm.
right, excessive weight load where there already was too much, something like that.
I think it goes back to the core of what Alexander work is that we really need to set ourselves up for success, and it's not the activity, it's what we are doing before, during, and after the activity
It makes the
that
difference.
that makes it either a
Mhm.
positive impact on the body or a negative impact on the body, and not letting the stimulus of the pole or the hill let have us let go of the purpose of the why. Why are we, am I setting my horse up for success? Is this putting more negative stress on my horse or positive stress on my horse?
Right.
And I think you have to have eyes on the ground for that, or just be willing to say it's not about the pole, it's about how am I using myself, or is my horse using himself in a positive or negative way for that activity?
Right. Right. And it can be either. It's like I know we've talked about before that time I threw a ground pole in front of you when you're like, I think I'm ready to show. So I throw one ground pole out in the arena and go, okay, just maintain balance over the ground pole. Like, you got this, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden our ambition comes up.
Yep.
We go right into the future. You're already in the show in your mind.
Yep.
And that balance goes out the window. It just is not even part of the conscious awareness because suddenly there's this object or this thing to achieve,
Right.
and it's very hard. It's a learned skill over time for elite riders, professional riders. It's one of the harder skills to develop, that you have this awareness of the self internally. You have this
Hmm.
awareness of the horse's movement all the way back to the tail, and you have an awareness of this object or task in front of you. Those are
Right.
like three different awarenesses that we're sort of juggling, and we can do it. That's where we almost shift into what I call the speed of the body, which is way faster than the speed of thought. So it
Right.
feels intuitive. We kind of lose our vocabulary to describe it because it's a little bit more right brain than left brain. We're no longer analyzing, we're just doing. And then
It's
you
the
can,
Yeah, it's like the internal external podcast we did. It's
yeah,
that conversation.
yeah.
Yeah.
But as long as we're thinking the hill is going to do the work for me, I just have to push or pull my horse up and down.
Yeah.
Or the cavalettes or the ground poles are going to give me the effect I want, so it doesn't matter how I do it. That's we never develop the internal awareness. We never develop the feel, the balance, the timing of helping
The
our
the correct
horses.
the correct timing and feel. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Or, just think of like when you injure yourself and you go to PT, you have to reprogram all of those neurotransmitters. And I'm sure most riders aren't thinking, well, this is a new thing I've introduced to this horse. He might not have the capacity.
Right.
It
No,
it
and
takes time to build those neurotransmitters and those pathways to all of the integrity of the ligaments and muscles to get good function.
absolutely. And even after you've built the neural pathways and that new coordination of balance is coming easier, you might not even have the muscle capacity yet. That's where
Good
training
point.
training can be a lot like physical therapy, which takes
Yes.
time, right? Because you are rebuilding neural pathways, but then you also need the muscle support for that
Yes.
new use of the body. And if we've been in a habit of dysfunction or we've had a bad injury, that muscle support isn't there. So
Right.
working harder in the wrong posture doesn't give you the muscle support you need for a good posture. It's like the more we're moving in dysfunctional, poor postures or use or bad balance, we're building muscle to support that use of the
That
skeleton.
imbalance.
We're
Hmm.
not building muscle that supports a better use of the skeleton,
Right.
because it's the coordination of the skeleton, which has more to do with the nervous system, that then builds
Exactly.
the muscles to support.
And I think it's a very timely thing to introduce. It's like, when do you introduce ground poles? When do you introduce hills? You
Yeah, and
know,
for me, it's after the horse is like neurally conditioned, has a new habit of movement,
yes,
and at least a better function towards optimal use or mechanical correctness, and can hold it easily without a lot of aids or help or heavy corrections or struggle. That tells me they have the muscle support,
right.
right? So until the riding feels easy to maintain in the least challenging situation, to sort of maintain this better posture, this better use, and the horse is strong enough that they're doing most of it with less guidance from us, then introducing a new stress is most likely going to take the horse back to an old habit of movement or an
Right.
instinctual movement or a compensatory dysfunctional use of the body to get the job done.
And the people do the same thing. And like you said way back when you introduced the ground pole to me, all just that simple stimulus of a
Everything you
new
had
act.
done beautifully for the hour before that went right out the freaking window. It was just gone. It's like because you were still having to concentrate and have conscious control to maintain your new body use, to maintain your horse's balance.
Right,
So I throw in and it was good. So you're like, I think I'm ready to show. So I go,
right,
okay, let's see how you do with a stimulation.
right. And we don't realize that it can just suck us dry.
It just sucks us right into it. It's like all of a sudden our, predatory instinct just
Yeah,
goes out there to the object and we lose all sense of what's happening internally between us and our
yeah.
horses. And so it's funny. It's funny because we all do it. It's like
We
no,
all do it. It's
we all do it.
instinctual. And
Yes.
to learn to override that is a process in itself.
Yeah, it's one of the skills that I would say defines an average or beginner rider from uh, advanced
Hmm.
rider, professional, elite rider. And that takes time to develop to be able to shift our focus that fast between where are we over gravity in our balance, where's our horse in balance, and then what is the objective? What's the pattern? What's the obstacle? What's the strategy of the show? Or what's the challenge of the competition? And those are three very different
Yep.
pieces of the puzzle. And so a lot of people who are going to shows to train or using these challenging obstacles in order to train, I go, that's, they don't realize that it's making their job harder,
Yeah.
right? Because now for safety's sake or to get through the competition, your main focus has to go towards the external, right? The job to do or the task. And if you're not really well conditioned, it,
Exactly.
if you're not habituated in your best use, or your horse isn't habituated in their best use, then it's just a hot mess. You can't do
It's
it. Yeah, you just can't do it backwards. You know what I
right.
mean?
And even looking at that, the stimulus of getting in the trailer and going to the show, what kind of horse do you have when it comes off the trailer?
Right.
It can even start there.
Yeah, or what my little mare taught me when we were doing like demos, Liberty demos and stuff, she would just monkey with me when we were in an actual performance. And what I realized is when I was practicing things and learning things with her at home, I was very connected to her. And as soon as I went into that environment where people were watching me,
Hmm.
my focus was on people watching me.
Good
And
point.
boy, did my little mare let me know. And she did it every single demo until I finally understood I'm not arriving at the competition as the same person
Right.
that I am at home. I'm a different person because of this stimulus. What
Exactly.
are people thinking of me? What is the judge thinking of me? Is my horse going to make me look bad? Is my horse going to make me look good? All of those thoughts were like, my little horse Primo was like, "Where did you go?
Yeah.
What happened to you? Who's there? That's not the person I recognize from home." And I
Yeah.
distinctly remember that lesson. That's why I threw that ground pole at you and I'm like, let's see how you do. Because all of a sudden you're thinking about your score, your test, the
Yep.
judge, the other competitors, the people watching you, and all these thoughts. You're literally almost leaving your body.
Yeah, you're living in the external.
And the horse feels that
They do.
detachment. They
That's a good way to put it,
absolutely.
detached.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I see some riders at some shows, especially with young green horses, that will actually hold them up and stop because it's not going, they're
Hmm.
feeling something isn't going, the horse isn't where they need to be. And they have, and we forget this, we forget that we have choices
Yeah.
to move
Yes.
on. And those upper level riders will just stop and excuse themselves from the ring.
Yep. They'll just put their hand up and
They'll
go,
put their and they're the
not
horse isn't
happening.
where it needs to be, we're done.
Yeah,
And we have to remember that we do have the choice
absolutely.
too. And I had an experience. I used to have a young girl boarder that boarded with me. She was 9 or 10, and I took her to a small dressage show, and my little mare, Finer Things, was just over the top, could not settle down. And it's about 15 minutes before my ride time. And this lovely boarder of mine comes up and puts her hand on my leg and says, "Mrs. Romero, you don't have to do this, you know." It was like, bam. It's like out of the mouth of babes.
Yes,
And I
yes,
went, "You're right. I don't have to do this."
right.
And I didn't.
There you go. Yeah,
So
absolutely. We have a choice.
we have a choice, and just keeping the best interests of our bodies and the horses' bodies as number one is
Yeah.
the best choice, I think.
What we don't have a choice over is how our horse is acting. I go, it is what it is. It's either
Yeah,
something you can work with or you can't. Now that you're
right.
within a time frame on a specific pattern, doing a specific competition, if it's not the same as it was at home at the starting gate,
Exactly.
good luck.
Good luck.
It's not going to get much better.
Especially if you have to do something at letter A and then another letter,
Well,
another
and
letter.
all competitions involve specificity, right? That's the
Yeah,
deal.
it's either time or specifics. It's either
Mhm.
time driven or yeah,
Right. Dressage is just a geometric pattern,
right.
right? It's a geometric pattern, but the idea is that the horse can maintain beautiful balance with all of these challenges within the geometry, which would be transitions, lengthening, shortening stride, putting in maneuvers, straight lines, circles, little circles, tight turns, right? All of these different geometric paths of travel are the challenge. A jump course, you still have your path of travel, but then there's gigantic obstacles in the way, right?
Right.
Or barrel racing, you've got this pattern and obstacles and a time frame,
Yep.
right? So the competition, that's a whole level of training in and of itself. But if we're going into, excuse me, this pollen is killing me. If we're going into training for competition with a horse that we're not connected to, we're fearful, or the horse is fearful, or the posture and the use is just massively dysfunctional, heavy, um, all these different issues that we're not going to solve that in the
Not in that stimulus.
not in the competition ring.
Mm-mm.
And people forget that the competition ring is to show your work from home.
Right.
It's not the place to go do the work.
No.
It's the place to show off or challenge your training level at home
Yeah.
in the best and least stimulating situation, right? You're doing the best you can. It's going pretty good. It's solid, it's reliable, it's easy for me and my horse. Now when I go to the competition, I have something to work with.
Yeah.
right? But I think a lot of people still use, just like the hills and the ground poles, they're looking at getting into competition way too early in order to train.
Right.
And I think some trainers push that idea because they make more money taking a client to a show.
That's a good point.
And I go, that's unfortunate because really the show is the last piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
right? The biggest question, whether it's ground poles or hill work, is can you as a rider maintain balance in the
Mm-hmm.
context of the challenge? And then can your horse maintain good balance in the context of the challenge? And if you go in a competition, you're going from one challenge to the next, to the next, to the next in a very specific pattern and time frame with specific obstacles. So it's like that's the challenge of the competition, but it's not
Yep.
a training venue.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think we got the idea across.
Mm-hmm.
Planting those seeds, you guys, so that, do more work while people are not watching, while you're not
Yeah.
on a specific time frame, specific pattern, or dealing with specific obstacles. Balance is balance is balance.
Mm-hmm.
It's you can work on it lots of different ways in the simplest exercises and then increase the level of challenge, which becomes the positive stress for the body. Yep.
Agreed.
Anything you want to add?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
good.
All right. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast. Please like, share, subscribe. We love your comments. And this is subscriber list has been pushing up there. I'm very excited. I
Yay.
hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. And also with every podcast, either on the podcast platform or on YouTube, I'm always putting information in the description box. So if you want to know where to find Deb or where to find me, it's always in the description box with every episode. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next
Thanks.
time.
Bye.